pieces before he could get to the Forum. Deferring therefore his resolution until the next day, he awoke about midnight, and finding the guards withdrawn, he leapt out of bed and sent round for his friends. But none of them vouchsafing any message in reply, he went with a few attendants to their houses. The doors being everywhere shut, and no one giving him any answer, he returned to his bedchamber, whence those who had the charge of it had all now eloped, some having gone one way and some another, carrying off with them his bedding and box of poison. He then endeavoured to find Spicillus, the gladiator, or some one to kill him, but not being able to procure any one, "What," said he, "have I then neither friend nor foe?" and immediately ran out as if he would throw himself into the Tiber. But this furious impulse subsiding, he wished for some place of privacy where he might collect his thoughts, and his freedman Phaon offering him his country house between the Salarian and Nomentan roads, about 4 miles from the city, he mounted a horse, barefoot as he was and in his tunic, only slipping over it an old soiled cloak, with his head muffled up and a handkerchief before his face, and 4 persons only to attend him, of whom Sporus was one. He was suddenly struck with horror by an earthquake, and by a flash of lightning which darted full in his face, and heard from the neighbouring camp the shouts of the soldiers wishing his destruction and prosperity to Galba. He also heard a traveller they met on the road say, "They are in pursuit of Nero," and another ask, "Is there any news in the city about Nero?" Uncovering his face when his horse was started by the scent of a carcass which lay in the road, he was recognised, and saluted by an old soldier who had been discharged from the guards. When they came to the lane which turned up to the house, they quitted their horses, and with much difficulty he wound among bushes and briars, and along a track through a bed of rushes, over which they spread their cloaks for him to walk on. Having reached a wall at the back of the villa, Phaon advised him to hide himself a while in a sand pit, when he replied, "I will not go under ground alive." Staying there some little time, while preparations were made for bringing him privately into the villa, he took up some water out of a neighbouring tank in his hand to drink, saying, "This is Nero's distilled water." Then, his cloak having been torn by the brambles, he pulled out the thorns which stuck in it. At last, being admitted, creeping upon his hands and knees through a hole made for him in the wall, he lay down in the first closet he came to, upon a miserable pallet with an old coverlet thrown over it, and being both hungry and thirsty, though he refused some coarse bread that was brought him, he drank a little warm water. All who surrounded him now pressing him to save himself from the indignities which were ready to befall him, he ordered a pit to be sunk before his eyes, of the size of his body, and the bottom to be covered with pieces of marble put together, if any could be found about the house, and water and wood to be got ready for immediate use about his corpse, weeping at everything that was done, and frequently saying, "What an artist is now about to perish!" Meanwhile, letters being brought in by a servant belonging to Phaon, he snatched them out of his hand, and there read, that he had been declared an enemy by the senate, and that search was making for him, that he might be punished according to the ancient custom of the Romans. He then inquired what kind of punishment that was, and being told that the practice was to strip the criminal naked and scourge him to death, while his neck was fastened within a forked stake, he was so terrified that he took up 2 daggers which he had brought with him, and after feeling the points of both, put them up again, saying, "The fatal hour is not yet come." One while he begged of Sporus to wail and lament, another while he entreated that one of them would set an example by killing himself, and then again he condemned his own want of resolution in these words: "I yet live to my shame and disgrace. This is not becoming for Nero, it is not becoming. Thou oughtest in such circumstances to have a good heart. Come then, courage, man." The horsemen, who had received orders to bring him away alive, were now approaching the house. As soon as he heard them coming, he uttered with a trembling voice the following verse: "Hippon, mo kupodon, ampictypos oata bale." The noise of swift-heeled steeds assails my ears. He drove a dagger into his throat, being assisted in the act by Epaphroditus, his secretary. A centurion bursting in just as he was half dead, and applying his cloak to the wound, pretending that he was come to his assistance, he made no other reply but this: "'Tis too late," and "Is this your loyalty?" Immediately after pronouncing these words he expired, with his eyes fixed and starting out of his head, to the terror of all who beheld him. He had requested of his attendants, as the most essential favour, that they would let no one have his head, but that by all means his body might be burnt entire. And this Icelus, Galba's freedman, granted. He had but a little before been discharged from the prison into which he had been thrown, when the disturbances first broke out. The expenses of his funeral amounted to 200,000 sesterces, the bed upon which his body was carried to the pile and burnt being covered with the white robes, interwoven with gold, which he had worn upon the calends of January preceding. His nurses, Ecloge and Alexandra, with his concubine Acte, deposited his remains in the tomb belonging to the family of the Domitii, which stands upon the top of the hill of the gardens, and is to be seen from the Campus Martius. In that monument, a coffin of porphyry, with an altar of marble of Luna over it, is enclosed by a wall built of stone brought from Thasos. In stature he was a little below the common height. His skin was foul and spotted, his hair inclined to yellow, his features were agreeable rather than handsome, his eyes grey and dull, his neck was thick, his belly prominent, his legs very slender, his constitution sound; for though excessively luxurious in his mode of living, he had in the course of 14 years only 3 fits of sickness, which were so slight that he neither forbore the use of wine, nor made any alteration in his usual diet. In his dress and the care of his person he was so careless, that he had his hair cut in rings one above another, and when in Achaia he let it grow long behind, and he generally appeared in public in the loose dress which he used at table, with a handkerchief about his neck, and without either a girdle or shoes. He was instructed when a boy in the rudiments of almost all the liberal sciences, but his mother diverted him from the study of philosophy as unsuited to one destined to be an emperor, and his preceptor Seneca discouraged him from reading the ancient orators, that he might longer secure his devotion to himself. Therefore, having a turn for poetry, he composed verses both with pleasure and ease, nor did he, as some think, publish those of other writers as his own. Several little pocket books and loose sheets have come into my possession, which contain some well-known verses in his own hand, and written in such a manner that it was very evident, from the blotting and interlining, that they had not been transcribed from a copy, nor dictated by another, but were written by the composer of them. He had likewise great taste for drawing and painting, as well as for moulding statues in plaster. But above all things he most eagerly coveted popularity, being the rival of every man who obtained the applause of the people for anything he did. It was the general belief that after the crowns he won by his performances on the stage, he would the next lustrum have taken his place among the wrestlers at the Olympic games; for he was continually practising that art, nor did he witness the gymnastic games in any part of Greece otherwise than sitting upon the ground in the stadium, as the umpires do. And if a pair of wrestlers happened to break the bounds, he would with his own hands drag them back into the centre of the circle. Because he was thought to equal Apollo in music and the sun in chariot driving, he resolved also to imitate the achievements of Hercules; and they say that a lion was got ready for him to kill, either with a club or with a close hug, in view of the people in the amphitheatre, which he was to perform naked. Towards the end of his life he publicly vowed that if his power in the state was securely re-established, he would, in the spectacles which he intended to exhibit in honour of his success, include a performance upon organs, as well as upon flutes and bagpipes, and on the last day of the games would act in the play, and take the part of Turnus, as we find it in Virgil. And there are some who say that he put to death the player Paris as a dangerous rival. He had an insatiable desire to immortalize his name, and acquire a reputation which should last through all succeeding ages, but it was capriciously directed. He therefore took from several things and places their former appellations, and gave them new names, derived from his own. He called the month of April Neroneus, and designed changing the name of Rome into that of Neropolis. He held all religious rites in contempt,